Presented exclusively by Mother's Polish.
Welcome back to another edition of the Slipstream podcast. We're bringing weekly Formula One content to you, the Formula One fan. I'm back out of the woods this week as your host, but we are a man down tonight in the Slipstream. Our DRS train is a little bit smaller. But joining me tonight, we've got Stin and Matthew. What's up, boys?
What's up? What's up?
Kind of bummed the triple header's over.
I know, right? Yeah, we'll get to that. We're a little bummed that this is the last of the back-to-back-to-back race weekends, and we actually have 3 weeks off coming up. But for this week's episode, we'll recap the weekend that was at the Italian Grand Prix in Monza, home of Ferrari and AlphaTauri. So let's just get straight into it. For this week, let's start with your one-sentence race review. Matt, let's start with you.
Maybe it's a question and not a sentence, but will he ever lose again? And maybe not this year.
This rate, it's hard to see Max losing any race. Stin, what about you? What's your one-sentence race review for the Monza Italian Grand Prix?
Safety is important, but race quality is more important.
Yeah, we'll touch on that.
I think they should have just paused the race, at the end of it.
Yeah, we'll certainly get to there. I think got a lot of comments on that. For me, it is it's pretty easy. Nyck De Vries is better than Latifi and should get that seat ASAP. That can kind of roll into some of the news that broke during practice and qualifying. Nyck De Vries got the call, Saturday morning that Alex Albon had emergency appendectomy surgery and was able to hop in the Williams for not only qualifying, but ultimately the race. Because he also drove in practice for Aston Martin, right?
Yep. Yeah, he did FP1 for Aston.
I that brings me to sort of a curiosity question. How different is the Aston Martin to the Williams? Does anybody know? Like, is that an easy transition? Because he's driven for what? Mercedes, Aston, and now Williams?
I was listening to the post-race press conference. I think it was George, because Max and George and Charles all karted with Nyck, and George and Max are good friends with Nyck as well. And they said that they tried to compare George's performance in Bahrain last year, and if his performance was equal to what Nyck had done this week, stepping into a new car as a reserve driver. And George said, no, it's way more impressive. I was a Formula One driver. He's just a backup. But he was talking about just the intricacies of how each of the vehicles is different. Like, look at the different steering wheels, right? Like, Williams is the only steering wheel that doesn't have that like LED built into it, and it's built into the chassis. The knobs are different. Everything is different. So he had to completely relearn how to handle a vehicle overnight.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. The comparison with George is interesting, but I think George nailed, the analogy. I mean, he was already in a Williams, had been in Formula One for a couple seasons. Sure, he gets strapped to maybe the greatest Formula One car in history in the 2020 Mercedes, and should have won the race if it wasn't for some issues with not having the right tire and all that stuff, right? Nyck, I mean, he's had a couple of opportunities this year as part of that sort of, up-and-coming driver. The reserve driver gets an opportunity from time to time to take and participate into free practice. And so it just so happened that Nyck was already in Monza. He was scheduled to drive for Aston Martin in FP1. And then, I don't know when it happened, but Alex Albon is out of the race for that emergency surgery. So, Matt, I'm just curious, what do you think that feeling was like for Nyck to get that call maybe first thing Saturday that says he thought his weekend was over, and he says, you know what? You got to step in for the actual race.
Yeah, I think there's this excitement level where he's never raced in a Formula One Grand Prix, but I think there's also like an oh shit moment of I'm about to race in a Formula One Grand Prix, and even though he's done FP1 3 times so far this season, as Austin said, he's having to relearn a new car up to qualifying, and for the race. And so you've got butterflies. You're probably nervous, excited, whatever, and just probably a whirlwind weekend. I'm sure he probably won't be able to sit back and really remember everything that happened, until the weeks to come, because it was probably just a complete blur for 48 hours.
Yeah, I did see after the race, and we'll get to his performance and how he actually did here in a minute. But his members of his pit crew had to pull him out of the car. He was so exhausted. I mean, I'm sure it was emotionally draining. To your point, the adrenaline probably running through his body, and then being in an F1 car for a full race has got to be a pretty immense situation that he went through.
Yeah, it was like he was stuck. Like he didn't have the physical capacity to get himself out. And I guess it was Pierre or whatever came out and congratulated him. And like he can't lift his arms up because he's still stuck in the car, and he has to wait for a pit crew member to come let him
I
out.
mean, it's kind of dangerous though. Like, if he's physically too exhausted to be able to get himself out of the vehicle, I mean, just rewind to Grosjean's crash in Bahrain. Like, you have to be able to get yourself out in an emergency. I wonder if they're gonna like mention something to him or the team about like, I know he filled in, but like he's got to get up to par with that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I don't know how you can, if there's any kind of like physical ability test that you have to do in order to confirm that you can do that. But certainly that was his
They
first
have to
time
do
going
like
through that kind of
a
race.
dry run of it. Yeah, like they have to be able to like get out of the vehicle within like 10 seconds or something a couple times in the season to verify that their license is still up to date and that they're physically capable and able to do so.
Well, that's cool. I didn't know that. But yeah, we'll get to Nyck and his performance. I think one thing this week with qualifying that was similar to Spa a couple weeks ago is that there was a heavy amount of grid penalties again this week. And so just general comments, Matt. Do you like the grid penalty structure? Should it change? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I think there's got to be something for, over exceeding, engine components or, powertrain, whatever, and all that. Austin can speak a little bit more to that. I don't necessarily like the difference between back of the grid to place penalties. I mean, I would just say that if you're at the back of the grid, but somebody's got a 15 place penalty and they qualify 17th, they're just behind everybody. I don't know if I necessarily like that structure part of it. Or was it Bottas? What did he have after last week? Or who was it that had like
31 places in penalties, but still started like P14?
Right, like that shouldn't.
13.
He should be in the back. I mean, I don't like the differentiation between those two. Um, I also think it's pointless for drivers to be out there as long as they're not qualifying for a spot. Like if Lewis was out there and he had these back of the grid penalties, and if he's the only one out there in Q3, it's almost kind of a penalize the team as well, because all he's there to do is to give George a tow, because it does nothing for him to drive faster than that.
Yeah, so Austin, you'll probably know more of the specifics here, but for those that don't know, you're only allowed a certain allocation of engine parts throughout a season. I know we touched on this probably in our Belgium review. But are there more penalties happening this year? Are there more failures, Austin? Why? I know you hit on it in Spa. Spa, there's a lot of overtaking, but to so quickly 2 races later, all of a sudden have 7 drivers take grid penalties again? Is something going on?
Yeah, I think the vehicles are definitely a little bit more fragile this year, hitting into a new um, kind of regulation time frame. But the engines are really the same, so it's interesting that they're having like mechanical issues. But yeah, you're allowed. I think it's 3 race engines, 3, and then the engine is like the actual engine, like the gas engine, and then there's the electric engine. And I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago, but as a refresher, the first time you take a new engine, each of those components is 10 places. Next time you take those parts, each one is only 5 positions. So like Max took half of an engine, but because he had already taken that part before, it wasn't a 10 place, it was a 5 place. I think it's tough to navigate. The teams definitely have to roll out the stuff strategically, like where you can, where you can't overtake, and when you might need another power engine. Um, but I don't think they should get rid of it, or I don't think they should add like another engine or two into the mix, because then you're enabling teams who can't keep reliability under control, and you're kind of like limiting the people who are doing well. Matt, you might be able to pull it up. Like, who hasn't had an engine penalty or a problem with an engine, and who can get on the original allocation of 3 engines this year? It's probably not many, but like, why would you just throw another engine into the mix for everyone if someone is able to fall by those regulations and stick to those guidelines?
Yeah, and to Matt, I think if I had to guess, I don't know if the Williams have had back of the grid penalties or the McLarens yet. Those might be the only ones, maybe. But yeah, it's part of the penalty structure is sort of, I don't like it, but I certainly think there should be penalties, and I don't know a better answer. You heard on the broadcast, Martin Brundle, I think it was, talking about a percentage of constructors' points, so it's more penal for the people higher up in the constructors' championship. But he also wanted to balance that with, at the end of the day, a lot of these like aren't the driver's fault. If you look at someone like Bottas, I mean, he's had 5 or 6 just engine failures, so he is being penalized for something that's probably out of his control. And so I don't know what the healthy balance is. I think one of the things that I also find interesting, let's just say Max took a brand new engine every race for the next 6 or 7 races that we have left. He's still going to finish on the podium in all of them. So is it even really that bad of a penalty?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I was going to reference the Mercedes last year. I think Bottas had 8 engines last year. And I, as a Red Bull fan, had kind of a conspiracy mindset of like, Bottas is taking engine penalties and burning them out to let Mercedes learn how much they can crank an engine up before it blows up, to then, when Lewis needs some, and look at Brazil when he took one, look at a couple of the races at the end of the year, that they knew, okay, I can turn this thing up to 110%, take a 5 or 10 place penalty, but I'm blowing through everyone. I think the interesting part is, how does that fall into cost cap? Like, engines are $5 to $10 million to produce, I would assume. Like, that has to be part removed from the cost cap, right?
You would think that would certainly be a part of it, and I guess we could look that up to confirm. Yes, I don't know what the healthy balance is. I think, the good thing, if there's a silver lining with all these grid penalties, is that you get a mixed up grid, which is exciting. But it makes, for me, qualifying is the best part of the weekend. Most weekends, a lot of times that decides to some degree where drivers finish. I don't have all the stats, but there's tracks that, the 13 of the last 17 pole sitters went on to win at this track. So it definitely is an exciting part. There's a lot of drama. It's quick. It's 1 hour. But it's just weird when someone qualifies, P3 like Carlos did, but then he goes to the back of the grid. So to Matt's point earlier, should they even? I think I brought this up a couple weeks ago. Should they even be allowed to participate? I kind of think they shouldn't, and I think that the penalties should go in reverse order of play. Like, for example, if Max takes an engine penalty, I think he should go to the back of the field because he's in first overall, right? You should prioritize the people who have less points, or maybe just take away points. I don't know what the balance is, but again, the silver lining here is that you get a jumbled up grid. So back to Nyck De Vries. I think he qualified in actually P13 ahead of his teammate Nicholas Latifi, who was P16. So kudos to him for getting into Q2. But with all the grid penalties, he actually started the race P8. So your first 2 rows were Leclerc on pole, George P2, and then the McLarens P3, P4. So yeah, I mean, if there's a silver lining, then you definitely have a mixed up grid going into the race. So going into the race, unless there's anything else you guys want to touch on with qualifying, it was an interesting start. So again, no weather this week, so a nice dry track here in Monza. The start was interesting. I don't know, Stin, if you know any of the reasons why, but Lando got swallowed up immediately. I think they said he maybe hit anti-stall, but immediately got swooped and passed by Gasly and some others behind him.
He said that I guess post race, they said that the mapping, so there's different like ECU settings, there's different like power delivery settings. And for some reason, he wasn't able to get into his launch delivery mode. So the team advised him, I guess, maybe before the formation lap, because you can't really have that communication on the formation lap, that he will have to start manually. So he won't have any like torque assist or clutch slip assist or anything. And he just bogged down.
Yeah, a little unfortunate for Lando. He, last year finished P2 behind his teammate, and we're all rooting for him to have a good race. Got off to a little bit of a slow start. I think the other early storylines were, how quickly was Max going to get from his 5-grid engine penalty down to P7 up to Leclerc, and as we've seen, I think a recurring theme over the last few weeks, it doesn't take him very long at all. I think by the end of the first lap, he was already in P5, and by the end of second lap, he was P3. I think he was already in P2 by lap 4. So as we've seen, it didn't take him long at all to clear, the guys in front of him, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think he blew by an Alpine and Lando on the start, so it put him up to 5. He could have gotten Gasly into 1, but I think he was a little bit more cautious. Kind of got backed up by George, I guess, getting a weird entry exit out of turn 2. So he was kind of sitting idly in 5th, and then I think the next lap he got both Gasly and Danny, and his hope was, and he was talking to GP, his engineer, that he was hoping to clear those guys before DRS set in so he could just get into his race rhythm, because DRS trains just catch people. I mean, Carlos kind of blew through his, but if you look at like Lewis and Sergio, the reason why they kind of placed where they did towards the end, like Sergio pit on lap 6 or 7 and kind of just ran his own race and didn't have to worry about people. I mean, if we rewind to our race on Wednesday, on F1 22, I pit really early. Matt, you and I both, and we were in like 17th and 18th. And then at the end of the safety car, it releases and pit cycles happen, and all of a sudden, like, we just inherit 1 and 2 out of nowhere. Like, as long as you can run with people, you're on pace. I think you're fine. But it was interesting that that he was able to clear so quickly, and then slowly catch George and kind of just stay in that 2-second window to Charles for the whole pit cycle.
Matt, how did your inheriting P2 in the Netherlands end up last week?
So coming around the Parabolica on the first lap after the safety car, I spun and went right into the wall. And then we have auto reset the track on. So everybody has it on, so nobody can just hit it on their own. So it just does it for everybody. And I didn't want to pit, but it had me going into the pits, and so it was sending me direct into the pits. So I as soon as I had control, I jerked it left and slammed into Charles, and that was it for me. So it was great time inheriting second place. I was in there for not even a full lap, but fun
Monza's
times.
tough. Monza's definitely tough.
Didn't I don't know why we rehashed last year. Didn't Charles crash in the Parabolica last year, or was that 2 years ago? Doesn't matter. But yeah, it could be a tricky turn. But I still have this theory. I know I brought it up a couple times this year. There has been basically zero chaos in turn 1 this season. And I think it has everything to do with the cost cap. No one wants to wreck out. I mean, I can't even think of maybe obviously there's going to be a little bump here or there. I think in the rear of the field, there's a tiny little tab between one of the Haas's, but there's been very little chaos in turn 1. And again, my theory is just, with cost cap considerations, I think everyone is playing a little bit safer because, the impact of that cost cap, I think, is clearly on their mind, or at least it's on their team's mind. And you don't want to ruin your race. But by being overly aggressive. And maybe also another factor is the fact that Max is so far ahead in the championship that there's a little less at play for the guys up front because the championship's essentially over. Yeah, just a theory I have. I don't know if you guys agree or disagree.
I mean, Lewis did say that, they kind of asked him you were stuck in 19th for a little while for those first 3 laps. And he full on mentioned that, especially going into that first turn, that because he ended up, I think after the first turn, he was 20th. And he was like, I wanted no part of it. I was just trying to essentially survive through it and, make it up later on the end. And I think you've got some of that, but I do also think you have some of these that you probably do have a lot of team principles that are like, we only have X amount of dollars. You've got to be more, there's got to be more cautious, racing, at the early stages of the race.
Do you think it's part of the new regulations now that it's a little bit easier to overtake, you're easier to follow, you don't have to stick the one move you might get in the entire race?
Yeah, I think that could be a good point. If the ability to overtake and track positions a little less, maybe marginally less important than it had been in years past. Yeah, I could see that. That's a good point.
Especially in a track like this where it's got so many straightaways that you can follow closely to, and you can get DRS on and overtake a little easier. There's no point unless you're Mick Schumacher and power slide it through the first chicane to really send it on anyone.
Yeah, a couple other notes. Early in the race, we mentioned it a little bit, but Carlos was definitely charging very fast from the back of the field compared to Lewis, who took a little bit more time and ultimately finished behind Carlos. A couple other comments early on. Latifi, our boy with all the grid penalties, I believe he started P10 and he fell back to P15 almost immediately. So that just goes back to my one sentence race review. I don't know how Williams doesn't look at Latifi and Nyck De Vries after just this one race. It just goes with Nick. Now, I don't know if contractually they can. I don't exactly know how that works. I realize Latifi's dad is the CEO of Sofina Foods, which is one of their main sponsors. So, that may be, why he ultimately sticks for the rest of the season. But if it wasn't clear already, it's clear Latifi's out after this year. And I think at least for one race, De Vries proved that he could handle it.
I think everyone on the grid agrees with that.
Yeah, I mean, to give a little bit of spoiler, I know we've talked about Nick a little bit. He had a great race. I mean, he stayed sort of in that top 10. He was definitely stuck in a DRS train for quite some time, but he finished P9. So he scored 2 points for Williams in one race, and Latifi has 0. So there are 21 drivers now who have scored this season, and Latifi is in 21st place, which is, maybe it's happened before, but not a good feeling when there's really usually only 20 drivers in F1 and you're in 21st place.
Who filled in for Vettel in the first couple of weeks? Wasn't that Miko?
Yep.
Yeah, Hulk was in 20th in the championship until a couple weeks ago when Latifi had like an 11th place, because the ties go to wins and then it goes to like highest place. So like, Latifi hasn't scored points, so he doesn't have a tiebreaker over anyone with points. God, it's terrible.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Latifi's in 22nd. He's been the worst driver on the field, in the field this year, and it's not close.
And I will admit, out of the 4 of us, 3 of us here and people that have been on the pod, I've given Nick a hard time. He's essentially a grandfather in age compared to other F1 drivers. And not that I've had concerns about his abilities, but you just don't see drivers come in at the age of 27 or 28 and almost, and be successful in the long term. But he did really well this weekend, especially on short notice. And I agree. I don't, unless it's contractually, there's no point that he shouldn't be off the grid for Williams for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I say, if the decision is solely based on driver talent, and I know, Nyck De Vries could go and wreck in his next 9 races for all we know, but he proved it. He qualified well. He was already faster, and he got in that car on Saturday morning, beat Latifi in qualifying, and beat him in the race, and got points. So now Williams is up to 6 points this season.
I mean, he found out that morning and then beat his teammate. I mean,
Yeah, I don't know what else you need to see, right?
Right. Yeah.
So moving throughout the rest of the race, I think the next sort of milestone within the race was Seb, unfortunate retirement, lap 12, his final race in Europe, and caused a VSC, right, Sten?
Yep, VSC. Interesting that the leaders tried to take advantage of it. The radio messages were VSC's out, Charles pit, box, and Max was instructed do the opposite. The pit window is, I think, 24, 27, something like that, call it 25 seconds in Monza. And with the VSC, it's lowered to about 17 because the pit straight is so fast that you just lose so much time to people running full speed. So the cars are limited. And Charles ran into the pits. VSC ended kind of halfway through, so he was kind of in that middle of maybe 20, 21, 22 seconds, so he didn't get the full benefit, but kind of forced the hand of a couple people to pit early. It's always interesting to see what an early VSC or safety car does to the strategies of people.
I also found it interesting that, if I'm not mistaken, Leclerc never mind, he started on softs, right?
Yep.
I was going to say, it seemed like, and maybe Checo had an issue, but he started on mediums and pit on lap 7. So I don't know if that was just because he was overheating the brakes and just needed to make a change to kind of cool him down. But it's always interesting to me when the medium tire runners pit before the soft tire runners.
So Checo had a slow puncture, so he was starting to get a flat. And something happened. I can't remember what it was. I read it earlier. But he had an issue with the brakes where they were caught on fire. And it took him a little bit of time to kind of cool them. He had to move his brake bias rearward to make it so he wasn't putting as much heat into those tires to let the actual fire on the ceramic brakes extinguish itself.
Yeah, if you didn't know already that these drivers are just straight badasses, could you imagine driving a Formula One a Formula One car with seeing flames coming out of one of your tires and just continue on driving? He was just like, got flames front right, and he just kept going. I mean, what would you do if you're driving, your truck, your car at home, and all of a sudden you see, I got flames coming out of my front right. Let's just push through, cool the car down.
I mean, those things get up to 1,000 degrees though. And I think that's Celsius. They get up to 17, 1800, 1900 degrees Fahrenheit. They are unbelievably hot. But that's the amount of energy that's needed to stop these cars in 60 meters, 80 meters from going 350 kph to 80, 70.
Matt, if your front right was on fire tomorrow morning when you're going to work, you just going to power on through it, or are you going to pull over?
I'm just calling in sick. Work from home day if that happens.
But yeah, it was interesting. I was curious to see if Checo was going to go the whole way. He pit on lap 7, threw on the hards, and he made it, I think, all the way to lap 43. He had about 10 laps to go when he put on the softs.
I just found the article. He had a flat on the wheel from lap 1, which was causing vibrations. Also, that dirt got into his brake intake, which was causing the early pit and the fire. So he pretty much had to burn off or exhaust out the dirt from the brake duct to be able to continue.
Yeah, the slow-mo shot of just the flame popping out was pretty spectacular. They do a really good job with that. So, that changed the structure of his race early, but he bounced back to obviously have a good race. Checo finishing P6. And he was rolling in, I think, P5 or 4 for a while before he had to have that last pit. And I think I know they were checking his hard tires. There may have been a problem. Otherwise, he may have, been nice to his tires and tried to make it all the way to the end and finish a little bit more track position. Sort of the next note on the race is Alonso's DNF on lap 33. Kind of the biggest bummer there, not only for him, but Alpine, is that ended Alonso's streak of 10 straight races in the points. So they were having a pretty good battle, the McLarens, the Alpines, at least with Fernando for quite some time. But unfortunately, Alonso had a DNF in the race early.
And that did. He tied. I don't know if they mentioned in the broadcast, but he tied Kimi for the most F1 Grand Prix in history at 350. His DNF also tied him with Kimi with 72 DNFs in his career. So a little parallel between those two. I thought that was interesting for Fernando. So he'll, as long as he starts in Singapore in 3 weeks, he'll have the most Grand Prix started in the history of F1.
That's interesting. I know math is hard, but if you have 72 DNFs out of 350, that's a 20% DNF rate. 1/5, right?
Yeah, right around there. It is. My fingers aren't working correctly. 20.6%. Yeah.
I wonder what's the. I know, Matt, you were talking about this earlier. What's the record for consecutive DNFs in a career?
I don't know for the consecutive retirements is 22 by Andrea De Cesaris. Between 86 and 88, spanned 3 seasons of just straight DNFs for him. He also holds the third longest record at 12. And another good stat for him, he somehow had 208 Grand Prix, which is incredible considering that he DNF'd 71% of them. So
finished 29% of the races he entered.
Yeah. You wouldn't be able to survive more than a season if that was the case now. But good for him. He made a long career out of it.
Well, the good news, I guess, in this case is for Alonso, he's at 1. So hopefully he's able to end his streak at DNFs at 1 in Singapore and bounce back. But yeah, unfortunate for him to end his 10 straight points finishes. They've obviously got P4 right now in the constructors in a pretty good spot. But, unfortunate to see Alonso bounce out early. The next DNF was Stroll. So unfortunate double DNF for Aston Martins. They just don't have it this year. Stin, I don't know if you have any commentary there around, what was it, 8 weeks ago or 8 races ago, everyone for maybe a week was upset because Aston Martin basically copied the Red Bull. And now no one cares because they just have no performance in their car, at least, it seems.
I mean, I think you can copy it, but unless you copy every single part, it's not going to come together. I think a lot of the stuff that's held sacred is the underfloor and underbody, and the teams are really just careful to cover up the vehicle, in those big black car wraps to try to protect any photography or anyone getting any competitive advantage off the vehicle. But no, the Aston Martin, other than really like the wing that they brought in, was it Hungary? That kind of broke the mold of what you can do with the end plates. Like, they haven't really done anything this year.
Yeah, no, he's not here tonight, but Cole was pretty adamant that we'd have, and I think not just him, I think there were other people predicting this, that there would be a lot of people copying that rear wing, but it doesn't seem that that's the case, at least so far. And maybe that's just been track dependent. Maybe a much higher downforce track, you might see more of it. I don't know if that's going to happen in Singapore or Japan or what, but
I think two teams have tested it. They tested it in FP1 or FP2. I want to say Ferrari and someone else have tested it just for a couple of install laps. With the test parts, you really only see like one of them come out. They try to get the data, and then they go back to the shop and try to tweak them and or manufacture more of them. So it was always going to take a few weeks to kind of produce those, but yeah, you need it on the applicable track, which is interesting going back to the wing situation. Can we talk about how big Max's wing was compared to everyone else and how it didn't matter for him?
Yeah, I mean, my only thought there is that, Red Bull seems to have pretty good straight line speed already. And so, they could maybe afford to have just the slight bit of downforce compared to the others who, like a Mercedes, who might be looking for more top end speed and go with the skinnier wing. I don't know. At this point, you could give Max a car without a rear wing, and he's probably still going to win the race. But speaking of winning the race, I know when I was watching it, I don't know about you guys, there was that lull sort of in the middle of the race where pit strategies were, a little bit different for everybody. Leclerc ended up coming in for a second pit and put on the softs and clearly wasn't going to make up the time or cut into the lead significantly that Max already had. And then we had our last DNF of the race, which was Danny Rick, lap 47, which caused a safety car. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of set up in my seat. I was like, oh, let's go. We're going to have, a race to the finish. Might get some drama with Charles, trying to win at their home track and maybe give Max a run for his money. You had, George there in P3, Sainz, who had an awesome race to that point in P4, and Lewis in P5, and kind of have just a drag it out race to the end. But no, they ended under safety car, and it took them 6.5 laps under safety car. Is that acceptable? Matt, what do you think?
No. I mean, he pulls it off in a spot where they are. I mean, they still need a telehandler to move it out, but they pulled it into a spot where it was easily accessible for them to get it out and off the track. And it still took them 6 laps to do so. And maybe it does take that long. Even if it does, at the end of the race, the fact that it's just allowed to go to the yellow flag, as Toto said though, that even after today, there's only one other time that hasn't happened. But it should have just been red flagged. Give them 3 laps, restart it, red flag it, let them go for 3 laps out of the pit, from the start finish line, and let them race. Don't do this yellow flag nonsense and just what could have been an exciting race and was an exciting race. It just kind of puts a damper on it.
Well, I think it's just interesting how it kind of played out. So, Daniel's car was stuck in gear, so the marshals weren't able to push it. That's why they weren't able to try to get it to a marshal spot. And then you've got the grid that's already really spread out. All of the leaders decided to pit because they were all outside of their own pit windows, meaning Max had a free pit stop because he was far enough ahead of Charles. Charles had a free pit stop to, get on new tires. So everyone put on new tires because there was no reason not to. But the issue is the track is really long. And with where the safety car came out, Max was kind of already past it when it came out. And by the time he caught it back up, it was a lap and a half later. Beyond that, you need all of the lead lap cars to catch up. And George was the first person behind the safety car before he decided to pit. So, like, the third place guy came out behind the safety car. He pit and then had to get back around to the safety car. So after that happens, they can then clear the back markers. So it took 2.5 to 3 laps to get Daniel's car out of the way, and then took a lap to get the back markers out of the way, and then you were already on the last lap. So I think, kind of like we said at Zandvoort, there's 2 buttons. There's the safety car button and there's the VSC button. I think they should have hit the safety car button immediately, which they did, assessed it and said, okay, if we haven't cleared the car left, back or out of the way, and there's 5 laps left, red flag it, because you're still going to need an install lap for a red flag. So if you pause with 5 laps left, you still only get 4 laps of racing because you have to go back through, get back on the starting grid. But if they did that, and here's where, as a fan, I would rather them change rules in the last 10% of a race, that if there is a red flag that suspends the race, you can't change your tires. It is what it is. You're going to start back up and then you're going to go. That would be my issue, is if they did that.
Yeah, there's so many parts of this rule that I would love to see change. Just generally speaking, it doesn't matter at any part in the race. I don't think you should pit under safety car at all. I don't think, like to your point, Austin, about red flags. I don't think you should be able to touch the car under a red flag. You can change wings, you can change tires. I think for me, a red flag basically freezes the race. I don't think you should be able to touch anything. Your car should remain the same. But that's a story for another day because there wasn't a red flag here, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I just rough math again. I mean, 6.5 laps is 12% of the entire race. So the last 12% of the race was all under safety car. And the craziest part for me, it wasn't even a crash. Not to rehash demons, but the field was spread out in Abu Dhabi last year. There was an actual wreck with Nicholas Latifi. They seem to have quote unquote gotten that one figured out in 2.5 laps, and they couldn't get this one figured out in 6.5 laps. It's just, I'm sure Lewis had that thought at least cross his mind that Abu Dhabi sure would have been nice to end under safety car. And I get it, Matt, to your point, we all want to see racing. So I think, and Austin, I think you brought this up before, you can't extend the race, right? Like NASCAR does the green-white checker where maybe it's called overtime or whatever they do. You can't do that in F1 car because they're fueled so precisely that they literally can't go over. So I understand not extending it. But yeah, I think within that certain margin of error, within the last 10% that you said, Austin, there should be thresholds that says if there's a safety car and it goes more than 2 laps, red flag it. Give you 4 laps or whatever of racing, maybe 3 laps of racing, and let the guys duke it out on the track.
Well, and even going back to that, they can have 110 kilos of fuel. They usually underfuel. You hear a lot of the engineers say like lift and coast. It's like instead of just going from gas to brake, kind of let off the throttle, use the engine to do a little bit of braking, save some fuel because every 5 kilos is like 1/10 of a second or something per lap. So it adds up to 7 seconds over a full race distance. It's a substantial number. But you can't extend the race because you have to provide a liter of fuel to the FIA after the race to verify that it's the proper mixture. And Vettel couldn't do that in Hungary last year and was on second and got disqualified because he couldn't provide enough fuel. So there's no way, I mean, theoretically, I guess they save some fuel in the VSC, like they're just not running as high of engine modes. But still, you can't extend the race because the race is the race. Just pause it and then pick it up when you're ready.
Yeah, so I mean, just as a viewer, and I can't get the Michael Massey saying out of my head. It's called motor racing, Toto. Well, we didn't get the motor racing today. And now look, would Max have probably still won? Probably. But for me, it's the element of you never know. All of a sudden, you bunch up the field for 3 laps of racing. You would have had a heck of an entertaining finish potentially with, the hometown Ferrari boys in P2 and P4, or maybe making a run at Max, or maybe Max probably wouldn't, but maybe he makes a mistake, or one of the Mercedes makes a mistake. And then anything can happen, right? We just unfortunately didn't get that. It was a parade for the last 6 laps. And, Austin, I think you mentioned this before we hopped on the podcast tonight, but Max got booed on the podium and was asked a question about that in the post race. And I think maybe part of the fans booing was 1, that Ferrari didn't win, and 2, that they didn't like the way that the race ended.
Yeah, it might not have been directly at him. I mean, it by all means could have been, but they were probably just mad at the outcome because while he was 19, or he was 8 seconds behind on new tires, Ferrari knew they couldn't win, so they wanted to try something else. They pit Charles to put on faster tires, came out 19 seconds behind, and Max was told, hey, just stay within half a second of Charles's time. There's 19 laps left. He'll never catch you. Just continue on. And I feel like maybe the Tifosi in the stands thought that this was their break that they needed. So again, they might have been booing Max for his dominance, or they might have just been booing the FIA for giving them the result that Max ended up winning and not Charles having a chance at the end.
Yeah, I just thought it was unfortunate, as I think most of the viewers thought it was unfortunate, because outside of, there was a lot of good battles. There was definitely some DRS trains throughout the midfield. There were some good overtakes from Carlos, and then, Lewis coming through the field, Checo coming through the field for a little bit, Nick hanging in that DRS train. But, overall, there wasn't a whole lot of action. There wasn't a wreck or big. I mean, frankly, I think outside of people locking up into turn one, I don't know if there's really a mistake in the whole race. It was a fairly clean, somewhat uneventful race. We didn't have our weekly Ferrari blunder, so Matt, I know you might be a little disappointed at that, but I wanted to see some drama there at the end of the race to kind of make it an exciting ending.
Yeah, it was a bummer. I mean, I mean, just stating again, I just don't think it should end under a yellow flag. I mean, like you said, it's motor racing. It's not a parade. You should allow them to race and finish it as a race, not them in single file line, like they're kindergartners going to the bathroom. Let them go. Let them duke it out. Stop the race. Put in there if the safety car is more than 3 laps or whatever it is, or 4 laps, then it has to red flag and you start. But
hasn't it happened like 13 times over the last like 20 years or something? Like under a safety car, like it still happens somewhat frequently. By frequently, I mean like every other season it happens. So it's not like this has never happened before. It's just we were so spoiled last year with such a great head-to-head battle throughout the entire season. I think we're now looking for something to make this more exciting because it has been a clear runaway for the last 5 or 6 races.
Yeah, I'm sure that's part of it. I know it is for me. You want to see that excitement. I just think one of the biggest pushbacks on the complaints Mercedes had last year in Abu Dhabi, and not to keep rehashing this, was that all of the teams got together and said they all agreed that they wanted to do everything possible to finish the race under green flag conditions. And so, right, wrong, or indifferent, they did that in Abu Dhabi in 2.5 laps of safety car. It didn't seem like they even tried today. I mean, 6.5 laps, not to beat a dead horse, it's too many. It's just they should have figured out a scenario to end under green after 6.5 laps. It took too long, and it was kind of a mess, and just a little bit of an unfortunate ending to today's race.
Well, it's not Austria; it's Monza. The lap times are 1 minute and 25 seconds. It's not like 1 minute and 3, 1 minute and 7 second lap. Like there's substantial times to these laps. So it was probably, we keep saying 6.5 minutes or 6.5 laps. It was probably 10 minutes to try to move the vehicle, and moving the vehicle probably took 5. But then and I get that they changed the rules and regulations where like the race director can't just decide this anymore. He does have to follow the book more tightly, but still, I mean, they definitely something to learn from this race.
One quick clarifying point here, Austin. So are you suggesting that they didn't follow the rulebook last year in Abu Dhabi?
No, he followed it to the best of his ability, but he also, the race director, which was one person last year, had the overruling authority to make the race happen. And he did so. I think the reason why it was so bad last year is because the miscommunication. Lap cars will not be over to overtake, whichever. And then a lap later, they're overtaking and we're starting. Like you kind of need one lap for each of those 3 milestones. Like the field bunches up, then the lap cars overtake, and then anyone who's still between the leader and anyone else on the lead lap is then able to pass. And they're just running wide open to try to catch the queue. That happened in those 3 steps. Only 2 of them happened, and they both happened in the same lap. This time they tried to follow it to the T, and the back cars wouldn't have been released until the last lap, and they were released on the last lap. They should have just tried to fast forward it one lap further, and they just couldn't do so because there was still a picker on the track. And do you guys know that De Vries got a penalty points for driving too closely to that after the race? So he was summoned to the stewards. He was I guess he wasn't paying attention very much, and around those turns, he kind of went to the middle of the track as opposed to like hugging the outside. And you could see on maybe the helicopter view, maybe when they were backing Daniel up, that he was in the middle of the track. He got 2 penalty points for that.
I do remember seeing that because I forget who it was. Maybe Bart Brundle was talking about how the picker finally got there, but he was like, the picker can't move because cars are coming around those two turns, right? And then so they had the great overhead shot from the helicopter. The picker was definitely moving, and Nyck De Vries, I didn't realize it was him. Now that you say that, it makes sense. He was definitely middle of the track, kind of close to the picker, which, it made the announcer's comment even more relevant, that obviously the majors say you don't want anything moving when these Formula One cars are coming around. So, yeah.
And the reason that is the case is because of Giles earlier in the 2000s. There was terrible rain. There was a picker on the sideline. He lost control and he hit it. And that was the last decision that he ever made. So the FIA said this is a very important rule that we need to stick by. And we're going to. Safety cars, VSCs, like if there is a marshal or if there are heavy equipment on the track or near the track, we are slowing this race down or stopping it.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about that. That was pretty brutal. But yeah, so Nick's 2 points in the drivers championship goes along with his 2 points. A quick follow up on the Nyck De Vries Latifi conversation on our Instagram handle. It's our followers at a 90% tick rate saying that Nyck De Vries should get the seat right now. So I don't know if our Instagram handle is going to put a lot of pressure on Williams, but I think we're all in agreement that should happen. So yeah, just recapping the results from the race real quickly. Max gets another win. How many in a row is that? 5, 6? 5. So 5 in a row for Max.
He ties Lewis Hamilton, Nigel Mansell, Jim Clark, and Jack Brabham for 5 overall. Next up, Nico Rosberg, Schumacher, and Alberto Ascari at 7. And then you've got Vettel, top man in 2013 at 9 consecutive.
Yeah, and I know, Austin, you mentioned this before the podcast as well. So Max has a chance to win the championship in Singapore, right?
Yeah, I think the math is based on everyone else having to score more points than what he has. I think if Charles finishes like 8th or 9th and Checo finishes 4th or lower, I think is the math. Max could win in Singapore. Regardless, most likely Max clinches in Japan.
Yeah, that one feels pretty inevitable. I think he might not say it out loud, but I think he's clearly gunning for the Vettel record. And he very well may get it the way that he's driving and the way that car's performing this year. Just quick recap, top 5, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Carlos Sainz, and Lewis Hamilton. A couple of just, good news stories. Pierre Gasly, another good race in Monza, where he won his first ever race 2 years ago. Obviously, we've talked about Nyck De Vries. And then Zhou Guanyu for Alfa Romeo, rounding out the top 10 and getting another point. Which makes me just quick random trivia question for you guys. Who's currently 10th in the driver standings? Would you believe me if I told you it was Valtteri Bottas?
He started so strong in the beginning of the year, and the back of the midfield has been so bad. No, I don't think I'd be surprised. I was going to say like him or K-Mag or kind of someone that had some decent races but can't put it together all the time.
Yeah, Bottas has not finished in the points in the last 7 races. And I think 3 or 4 of those were DNFs. But even in the races where he's finishing, he's been outside, which is a little surprising. He did start off pretty well. He's got 46 points, so he's got a pretty large lead over, I think Pierre's now in 11th in the drivers. So Bottas may not finish another race this season and still finish P10.
And linking back up to the Pierre's maiden victory, also talking about Charles crashing in Parabolica. I looked it up earlier when we were chatting. The last 3 years, the winner of this track has DNF'd the next year. Charles DNF. Pierre last year kind of got pushed wide into turn 3, got damaged, drove through the gravel, DNF lap 1. Danny Rick, last year's winner, DNF. So not good for Max next year.
Yeah, so if you're a betting person, jot that down in your little betting notebook and don't take Max next year.
So here on the Slipstream podcast, we predict Max wins every single race up until Italy next season.
I wish we had a
God,
dun 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 dun.
could you imagine what would that be?
Like 29
21 wins
races.
in a row. I mean, he is really great in the vehicle that he has, but he needs so many things to go right for him. Like this safety car, like could have gone really horribly. In Zandvoort, the safety car could have gone really horribly, and they're not making the wrong decisions at Red Bull. I think that's the ultimate thing. Like Ferrari's making the wrong decisions. I don't think Red Bull can make a wrong decision. Their pace is so fast.
Well, I'll say, Ferrari didn't really have a blunder this week for the first time, and I think for the first time in like 13 weeks or whatever it may be. But I don't know. They have to go outside of the norm, or I don't want to say the norm, but of a standard race, because they know they can't beat him. They can't beat him car to car, driver to driver. That's why they pit underneath the safety car, Charles, early, because they had to try something else. Red Bull doesn't have to try anything new or different or out of the norm to win a race, because Max is so good and that car is so good. So, I mean, things have to go really wrong outside of Max's control for him to lose a race, and everybody else has to try something. They have to be desperate at this point to try to beat him. And it's really interesting to see what that desperation brings out in these other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Austin, you hit on this a little bit. I think the hope, I know for someone like me with the safety car, or even last week, hoping that there weren't safety cars, is that it at least gives you the feeling that maybe there'll be, some wheel to wheel racing on a final lap to decide a winner. But for that, I mean, he's just on another level, and he's in the best car and he's the best driver right now. So, if those two things stay the same, there's going to be a lot of races where he finishes 20, 30 seconds ahead of even the second place driver. So not that,
Do we think
not,
they're the best cars still?
Yeah.
I don't think it's by a large margin, though. I mean, look what Sergio's doing. Sergio's still not getting podiums.
The Sergio thing is mind boggling to me. I don't know how he's not. I mean, I know he's third in the points, but he's not racing at a quality that you would expect from him, in my opinion.
I think we talked about that maybe, or touched on it last week, is that maybe the initial development of this car fit Checo's racing style really, really well. And over the course of the season, they've developed the car to fit Max's driving style better. So maybe that's just, I don't know exactly how it works. I'm sure you do, Austin, but I know Max likes a pointy car, which I don't think a lot of drivers do. So, if Checo doesn't like a pointy car, but he's having to drive a pointy car, it might be hurting his performance a little bit, at least compared to how he was doing earlier this year.
I would also say that Max is probably getting the upgrades. Not that they're bringing very many upgrades, but they're not producing two sets of each of the upgrades. So he's probably getting a little bit better of a vehicle. But going back to like the pace comment we were talking about, Charles pit twice in normal racing conditions. Everyone else pit under the safety car, but so Charles was on 3 stints. He went soft, medium, soft. Max extended his stint pretty far on the mediums or on the softs, because he had such a large rear wing. There was more traction under the turning zones, so he didn't have as much tire slip. Extended his stint longer, and then if you look at the race pace on a 2 stint compared to a 3 stint, Max was still faster. And you would think that okay, like it takes more time to like pit from the pit cycle and whatnot, but like race pace removes that out. Max on 2 older sets of tires, right, was still faster than what Charles was able to do over a race distance with a new set of softs at the end, or towards the end, the last 9 racing laps on the track. It's unbelievable that he still had more pace without the pit cycles.
And you asked if we still thought they had the better car, and I think the one thing that Ferrari had over them, at least at the beginning of the year, was that aero and those fast corners and being able to get in a turn and then out fairly quickly. And I think Red Bull's at least caught up to them on that. I mean, I think they're at that point. I mean, like you look in Hungary, I mean, Max wins that race. You look in these courses that you would think that Ferrari would, if they were in
Even
earlier in the
Zandvoort.
year, right? I mean, if those tracks were earlier in the year, you would have thought maybe Ferrari would be the predicted winner in those tracks, and they're not even keeping up with the Red Bull at this point. So I do think it's the best car now.
But Ferrari has also come out and said that the technical directive that was kind of modified and rolled out later in the year to make it so like the floors couldn't flex more than 3 millimeters at 2 different anchor points on the side of the vehicle, that they had to change their vehicle. Like they had to change their car, and Mercedes was really pushing for that TD, and they were expecting Red Bull and Ferrari to get caught out by that. And what it ended up doing is putting Red Bull a little bit further ahead because they weren't having issues with the floor flexing, and Ferrari was. So Ferrari took a step back. I think Mercedes took a small step back, but I think it just made the Red Bull the monster that it is by trying to catch them bending a regulation that they shouldn't have been touching when they were so far spot on and completely legal.
I think another thing too that Red Bull has definitely built the most versatile car. Meaning, you hear constructors even like Mercedes, oh, we don't think this track will be strong for us. Or Haas is like, oh, I don't think Monza will be a good track for us. I don't think it matters what track you put that Red Bull on, at least the one Max is driving. And it's the best car, or at least it's on par with the best car, and it's got the best driver. So, yeah, Max is crushing it. So, anything else on the race you guys want to touch on? One last thing I wanted to do was shout out our new friends at forecast_F1 on Instagram. They run a pretty cool predictions style game, which we entered this week for the first time. And I know he's not here. I'd give him some kudos, but Cole actually nailed the top 5. So, if you check out our Instagram at the Slipstream F1 pod, you can see those results from our friends. And I think Cole either has the highest score they've ever had in this game or the second highest one. So I think he got like 6 or 7 actual places correct. So he's not here to get our round of applause, but kudos to Cole for a well done on his predictions, and thanks to our friends forecast_F1 for tracking that for us. So just quick look ahead. I think there's 3 weeks off until we get back to racing in Singapore. We've got a couple races in Asia at Singapore and Japan before heading here to the United States for the race in Austin. So a little bummed about that. I know we've been spoiled after summer break with 3 straight race weekends. But we've got some good stuff coming up for you. So as a reminder, we'll be back with you guys later in the middle of the week with our F1 101 series, our quick short series of sort of the basic introductory Formula One, terminology, and getting you guys up to speed on all things Formula One. And then as a little teaser for our next main episode is we actually will have a special guest joining us. So we're looking forward to that. So don't miss us. We'll be back, even though Formula One won't be back next week. We'll be back throughout this week and next week. So as always, thanks for tuning in. Talk to you soon.